Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we are finally looking at our Paladin Multiclassing tier list. And it's not going to be a big surprise, I don't think. Paladin ranks really well in some particular multiclasses and very poorly in others. There's just some things that are not a particularly good fit. But overall, Paladins are one of the best multiclassers in the entire game. The Paladin class on its own is already a very strong base class, getting extra attack, any armor option you want, shields. Of course, you've got your own unique mechanics like smites. You're a half caster. You've got your auras and stuff. In general, it offers a lot. The fact that your casting stat is charisma and that your saving throws are charisma is also a really natural fit with a lot of other charisma-based spellcasting classes like Bard, Sorcerer, and Warlock, all of which Paladin multiclasses with very well. No spoilers, you already knew that. Overall, Paladin is just a very strong class in general, and Smite is one of the very rare mechanics that can actually be improved through multiclassing. Now, I say can be because it's not a given, but the reason is because progressing as a full caster just allows you to end up having higher level spell slots than a straight Paladin would have. And so by multiclassing with another full caster on top of the Paladin half caster, you can actually end up with higher level and better smiting than a straight Paladin would have. And that's pretty rare in this game. There's not a lot of mechanics where by multiclassing with something else, you can actually improve it by grabbing this other class. Usually it's based on, your levels in that class or whatever, right? Maybe you're lucky and it's based on proficiency bonus, in which case it's not helped or hindered either way. But it's very rare that it becomes stronger by mixing it with another class. So anyways, let's get into the heart of the video. As always, I will be ranking things with an A, B, C, D, E type system. But above them all, reigning supreme is our S tier. And I've mentioned before, but I'll mention it here again, I'm fairly stingy with S tier. I try not to hand out a lot of S tiers. To me, S tier are just like those builds that are just like the absolute elite of the elite. And if you give everything an S tier, then it's, it loses some of its meaning. So just be aware that if I think something's an A and you think it's an S, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're wrong and I'm right. These are all just my opinion, right? Just bear in mind that, maybe I give something an E instead of a D, or a D instead of an E. I actually, in my Monk video, someone complained that I overrated Monk Paladin by giving it a D. And honestly, they could be right. It could actually just be a straight up E. They made some very good points, and I was like, yeah, maybe saying this was a D was still overrating it. To me, that meant that it was a bad subclass, or a bad multi-class combination. But it might have been even worse than I gave it. So, like I said though, these are all just my opinion. So, bear that in mind. Don't take it too seriously. This is just kind of an approximation of how I think they fit together. And, I've played a lot of D&D, but it's not like I've played every single possible combination there is. So a lot of these are just kind of theory crafted. Some of them I've actually played or seen other people play, but that's not always the case. So, keep all that in mind. As usual, I might as well go over this really quickly as well. When I multiclass, I'm usually looking to add 3 different things, mainly. There might be other exceptions, of course, but number 1 is to really double down on my core proficiency, right? I'm going to take something that this class is really good at, I'm going to combine it with this class that's also really good at that same thing, but usually achieves it a different way. And by taking the strengths of A and the strengths of B, putting them together in one awesome mix, you get the best of both worlds. This is usually the best, at least from a mechanical standpoint, the best reason to multiclass. Reason number 2, though, is to cover for core weaknesses in your base class. So I've given the example many times, I'll use it again. Like, say you want it to be a wizard, but wizards are very weak and fragile at low levels, so you decide to maybe start as a fighter, allowing you to use any armor you want and to use a shield, as well as giving you Constitution as one of your saving throw proficiencies, meaning you're also going to be proficient on concentration saves. And this can be a very easy way for just one level of fighter to get around some of the big weaknesses that wizards have. You could also take 2 levels of fighter and get action surge, which is also a good idea. But, you know, this also has some trade-offs though, right? Unlike the first example where we're taking 2 things that are great, putting them together and being even greater, this one, in the example we just gave, it means you're delaying your wizard spell progression. And that's not that's not nothing, right? That's kind of a big deal. So while you're definitely covering for weaknesses, you're also kind of often delaying some of the class's real strengths from coming online. So that's why I consider it not to be quite as good a reason. Still a very good reason, but not as good as reason number 1. Reason number 3, the weakest of the bunch, but also still a strong reason, is to gain utility in the class. And usually when you're gaining utility, it does mean you're trading off other stuff, right? You're pushing things back, you're delaying them, and you're maybe getting a lot of out of combat stuff, or maybe you're just getting more skills, or whatever else you might have wanted. And this is still a good reason, right? There's more to the game than just combat. Maybe you wanted like a familiar so it can scout for you or something like that, because you're not particularly stealthy and you're not very good at that kind of thing. Now, the reason I say this is the worst reason though, and aside from like more trade-offs, is also because you're probably never going to be as good at that new thing you're adding utility for as somebody dedicated to that, right? So in the scouting example, you're never going to be as good as like a rogue with stealth and expertise. And even if your familiar is pretty stealthy, it's probably not going to be as good as, say, a druid who decides to shape change and can do anything your familiar can do, but better, right? Somebody who decides to take some wizard levels so they can maybe get some ritual casting. That's not a bad idea, but you're never going to be as good at it as an actual wizard, So again, this is what I mean. You're adding utility, which can be very good if nobody else in your party can do that thing really well. But if somebody else can already do it well, it has less benefit to the party. And that's not to say there's no benefit, right? Having 2 people with ritual casting is better than 1, right? Maybe you want to like focus on different types of spells, and your wizard doesn't really care about ritual spells much, right? Then you get more variety. Maybe you're taking like druid or something, and so you're bringing in a different type of spell with a different spell list. These can all be good reasons to multi-class. They're just, not normally as strong as reason number 1 or reason number 2. But anyways, all that aside, let's get into the Paladin. Like I said, Paladin is an excellent base class. I also think, just on a personal note here, Paladin is one of my favorite classes to play. I've mentioned this before, but Paladin is one of these classes where you can really easily get an idea of who this person is that you are playing, right? You've got your oath, you've got usually some sort of like set of ideals, and it's not like it used to be back in like 1st or 2nd edition where Paladins were all honor bound, and the term lawful stupid was invented mostly because of Paladins, These days you've got Oath of Conquest, Oath of Vengeance, there's a lot more like gray or even evil Paladins. Oath Breaker isn't even an option in some campaigns. Technically it's an NPC class, but I've seen DMs allow it, and I wouldn't have a problem with it either. So you've got a lot more options for Paladin these days. You don't have to be, the Boy Scout type image that we're so used to from the past. You can be a lot of other things, but no matter what you are, having that oath and having the sort of core ideals and principles, even if they're principles of evil, can give you a strong direction for who your character is and how you want to play that character. And it just tends to make much stronger like role play type of choices, because a lot of who this character is already kind of like, it's a natural process for you to figure out based on, how you're building it and what your oaths and stuff are, right? And so that's one thing I like about Paladins. It's a class that's mechanically very sound, combined with a class that has a lot of role play built into it, and that just tends to make strong characters. But anyways, on to the actual multi-classing. So as always, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So we're starting with Artificer. I should also say before we get into this, for purposes of this video, when I talk about a Paladin build, we're not usually talking about like dipping 2 levels of Paladin just for smites. We're talking about usually 6+ levels of Paladin. So even if eventually, let's say we're talking about Paladin Sorcerer, for example, right? Let's say you take 6 levels of Paladin, you go all the rest Sorcerer. Very common multi-class, very, very strong. Even though we're eventually adding a lot more Sorcerer levels at a higher level than we have Paladin, to me that's still a Paladin build, because I'm probably starting with 6 levels of Paladin right off the bat, or maybe I'm taking 2 Paladin, 1 Sorcerer, and then going the rest of the way Paladin again up to 6 or 7, maybe even 8 depending, maybe potentially 11. 11 we're definitely into the, hardcore Paladin type of builds. But, going back to the 6 levels example, to me though, like as long as I'm wading into combat and I'm wearing some sort of armor, maybe heavy armor, maybe medium armor, whatever, potentially using a shield, or maybe I've got a great weapon or a pole arm or whatever I'm using, and I'm, occupying space in that front line, and I'm smashing people with my weapon, maybe casting some spells and stuff, but mostly I'm playing like a Paladin. I'm using my aura to try to protect my allies around me. To me, that is a Paladin build, because I'm starting Paladin, I'm playing mostly those early levels as a Paladin, maybe as a pure Paladin even, and I still have that Paladin-focused playstyle. On the other hand, a Sorcerer build would be one where I take a couple levels of Paladin so I can have some decent armor, maybe use a shield, and then I sit back and I cast spells like a Sorcerer. But now instead of having terrible armor class, I've got a really great armor class, and I've got a shield. And I could even potentially Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade, drop a Smite on top of that. So even if somebody gets in my face, maybe they have a teleport or a Misty Step type ability or something like that, I'm not some like squishy backliner. For the price of 2 levels of Paladin, which isn't so bad, I've taken care of a lot of my defensive issues, and now I've even got some alternative ways of attacking, right? A Booming Blade, and then quicken casting another Booming Blade might just be better than, say, a Firebolt or whatever else I was going to do that round, unless I was going to cast an actual leveled spell, right? But to me, that's not really a Paladin build. I'm playing as a Sorcerer more, not a Paladin. So I just want to kind of clear that up. We're really looking at taking a bunch of Paladin levels at the beginning, and even if we end up with more of whatever the other class ends up being, we're playing more like a Paladin than we are that other class. So anyways, all that aside, let's jump into the Artificer finally here. So Artificer, of course, as always, is going to give us some interesting spell choices. It's going to give us the ability to infuse different items and turn them magical, which is very, very nice. It gives us some potential nice bonus action abilities. As I've mentioned before, every single Artificer subclass has something we can do as our bonus action. And depending on our Paladin subclass, we may not have a lot of that, right? Now, maybe you took like Oath of Vengeance, in which case you could have Hunter's Mark, and you might be using Vow of Enmity, which are both going to use a bonus action, right? Perhaps you went Oath of Conquest, and you're planning on taking Spiritual Weapon, and you're going to use that during your bonus action. Maybe you just took Polearm Master because you figured having a bonus action attack gave you a third opportunity to smite. Nothing wrong with that. But either way, if you didn't have a lot to do with a bonus action, Artificer can kind of help to cover that. However, as you probably already guessed, Artificer using intelligence, you need strength. Probably you might be a Dex Paladin, but we're going to assume probably strength, since you need 13 strength to multiclass in or out of Paladin anyways. You might want to be wearing heavy armor, in which case you're needing a bunch of strength to not take movement penalties with it. That kind of thing, right? So you're needing strength, you're also needing charisma, now you're needing intelligence on top of that. It does get very, we call it MAD, multiple attribute dependent, and that generally sucks. So, while there are a few things to entice us, overall, Artificer just doesn't really have a lot to offer. A lot of the spells, which are nice, we can get from other from other classes instead, and it just ends up being a much smoother and more natural fit. So in the end, I'm forced to give Artificer a D. This is also partly because of the same problem we've talked about infusions before. Infusions are really nice at low levels when you haven't found a lot of magical items yet, and now you can enchant your weapons and your armor and stuff. And these are really big bonuses until you actually have magical weapons and armor. In which case, now you probably have like a bag of holding, which is still good, nothing wrong with that. That's nice. But it kind of loses its impact. And because we're not taking a lot of Artificer, it's just offering us a lot less. Also, Artificer is a half caster. And while that's not bad, it's still contributing to our spell casting. It's nowhere near the impact that combining our Paladin with a full caster would be. And there's just so many better options that, unfortunately, Artificer is just not really strong. It's not the worst, but it's not great. So next, we have the Barbarian. Barbarian can give us Rage, Reckless Attack, potentially an Archetype if we go high enough. And hey, let's not forget that, a Paladin combined with a Zealot Barbarian is pretty cool and thematic. I kind of like that idea. It's a sort of natural fit there. We do lose heavy armor. That's unfortunate. And we lose the ability to cast or concentrate on spells while raging. And this can be kind of an issue because higher level spells start being pretty good. However, a lot of Paladins actually just play as smite machines, in which case it's not a big deal. You can still smite while raging. You can't cast spells or concentrate on them, but you can smite while raging. And, this gives you basically double the chance of getting a crit, which you can turn into a crit smite. Not going to lie, that's kind of cool too. You're not going to have a lot of rages, most likely. Probably 2 a day is all you're going to have. But that can still be pretty significant. And, if you wanted to go like that Great Weapon Master route, adding Reckless Attack to help compensate for that -5 hit penalty is a really, really good fix for it. I do think that at higher levels, I start liking spells a lot more. And so I think that the Barbarian doesn't go as well as some of the other options into the higher level of play. But a lot of times you never get to those levels anyways, or if you do, it's late in the campaign. And I think that if you wanted to be, like, say, we mentioned Paladin Master before with Great Weapon Master, maybe you want to just be that kind of guy and land a bunch of smites while using Great Weapon Mastery. Barbarian's not a bad way to do it. So in the end, I'm giving this a B, but I think it could even potentially be like a B+ or an A-, somewhere in that range. It's actually very, very solid. I like it quite a bit. I think they're still stronger, but it's very good. So anyways, Bard. Bard, of course, is going to give us some skills. It's going to give us Jack of all trades. And I'm going to point out something I don't usually mention. The Jack of all trades is actually really nice on a class like Paladin, who probably has a pretty poor initiative, right? If you're needing strength and charisma, you're probably going to want some constitution as well. It's really hard to get a lot of dex. Now, maybe you're making a dex-based Paladin. That's always viable too. But in general, that's not the route that Paladins tend to go down. So, getting half your proficiency bonus rounded down, added to your initiative, it's not nothing. And Jack of all trades, just in general, is a really, really good ability. Of course, you also get full spell casting progression from Bard and their charisma caster. So needless to say, there's quite a bit good here. Now, an obvious mix is to take 6+ levels of Paladin and then take 5 levels of Sword Bard. I say 5 specifically because Bard doesn't get extra attack until level 6 and they don't stack, so there's no point trying to double that up. But also because then your Bardic Inspiration comes back on a short rest instead of a long rest, which makes a pretty big difference. But the truth is, there's a lot of Bardic subclasses that are really, really good. And if you didn't want to go swords because you don't really care about the sword flourishes as much, maybe you cared more about just getting higher level spell slots, right? Then, things like Lore Bard are excellent choice. College of Eloquence Bards are excellent, And now you have a character that's really good in combat, has some nice spell casting, and can also really shine in that social pillar of play as well, because you're going to have good charisma. You've got the Bard stuff. It's very, very good. I don't think it's quite as good as a couple of the other options, so I'm putting this in the A tier. But, that said, the fact that pretty much any Paladin and pretty much any Bard subclasses can go together well makes this a really, really solid option. And yeah, I like Swords Bard in this case, but like I said, you can use any of them almost. I probably wouldn't use Valor. Not that I don't like Valor Bards. I think Valor is very, very good, right? It's basically the only Bard subclass that's going to give you decent armor and a shield. So, there is that. But it has the same problems that Sword Bard does, meaning that you probably don't want to take 6+ levels of it because your extra attack is going to be a dead level. But it doesn't give you the flourishes, which are actually pretty nice. So, and you don't need the armor and shield bonuses that Valor could have given you because you've already got that from Paladin. So in this case, Swords just offers way more. So anyways, all that aside, Bard gets an A. Very, very good. Next we have Cleric. And this intuitively feels like it should be really good because back in the old days, Paladins used Wisdom just like Clerics did. But nowadays, they use Charisma, which means it's actually nowhere near as good as you would have thought. That said, it's not awful. You do get some better spell casting. You do have full spell casting progression. You can get some domain features. You can get another Channel Divinity option, which, could be nice, right? Small cleric tips can actually be really, really effective. Like, say, 1 level of life cleric combined with the Aura of Vitality spell can have some really big benefits, right? Tempest clerics combined with Thunderous Smite for, lots of pushing potential. Again, pretty good, right? Even a War Cleric with Great Weapon Master, you can get that +10 to hit, and it can help compensate for that -5 hit penalty. And, if you're using, let's say you're not using a polearm, let's say you're just using a greatsword or a maul or something along those lines, getting a bonus action attack a couple times is not the worst thing ever either, Saving for like your big bad, evil guy at the end of the dungeon type of thing. And, it's not the worst. Overall, though, again, I still think there's better. But I'd say Cleric's probably C tier. You're still getting full casting progression. A lot of Cleric spells aren't really, especially if you're not using a lot of attack spells and you're not, giving people a saving throw specifically. You just want to have maybe more healing and more buffs and stuff. That kind of stuff is fine, even if your wisdom is kind of subpar, Bless doesn't care if you have 20 wisdom or 13, for example. It's still good either way. On the other hand, though, you could have already gotten Bless from Paladin. So, keep that in mind. That is another disadvantage as well, actually, that I should probably mention really quick, is that there is a lot of overlap between the two. And, if you have it on your Paladin list, you might as well just cast it with your Charisma instead. So anyways, Cleric gets a C. Moving on. Next we have the Druid. Obviously, more spells, again. Wild Shape. Probably out of combat. You're probably not going to be going Moon Druid on this build. But, it could give me some more versatility. Unfortunately, though, drawbacks are pretty significant. Just like Cleric, you're using Wisdom. Paladin doesn't really need Wisdom that much. So it's, once again, multiple attribute dependent. That's not great. Also, Druids can't wear metal armor. That's kind of a big deal if you're a Paladin. One of the big draws, at least for me for Paladin, is the fact that I'm a, heavily armored character probably, and just standing up in the front front row, just dropping smites on people. That's part of the fun of the class, honestly. So, that's kind of a big yikes. Also, I just kind of feel like if I really wanted to go with a Wisdom class, Cleric just does most of what Druid's doing in this case, but better. Druid definitely has a lot of other instances where it does better, but this just isn't one of them in my opinion. So Druid, I was kind of on the fence between D and E, but when in doubt, let's just give it an E. Is it the worst? No. There's worse than this. But it's not good. Anyways, moving on. We have Fighter. Obviously, Fighter is going to give us another fighting style. And in this case, any fighting style in the game, right? The Paladin ones are a lot more limited. So we can get another fighting style. We're going to get Action Surge, a bonus action self-only heal. Potentially Battle Master maneuvers or Rune Knight runes. Or more crits for your smites from Champion. Things like the Shield spell from Eldritch Knight. Even things like an Echo Knight. Just, like almost any fighter subclass actually has quite a bit to offer. Now, again, there's really no point going to level 5 or higher because we're just going to end up with some dead levels at extra attack. But, you know, if you want to take 2 to 4 levels of fighter, get Action Surge and Archetype, maybe that ability score increase if you really want it. There's lots of good things there. And, you know, you might even consider at that point triple classing and grabbing, you know, maybe something that's going to give you full spellcaster progression and try to make up for those fighter levels a little bit, you know? Although Eldritch Knight could contribute a little bit at least. Not a lot, it's only a third caster, but it's something. And Eldritch Knight does give you not just shield, but, you know, potentially absorb elements is quite nice. A familiar could be really good. You know, there's a lot of good stuff from fighter subclasses to grab. So in the end, I'm giving this one an A. I think it's more of a lower tiered A. It's definitely behind Bard in my opinion, but it's still pretty good. So let's call it an A minus, I guess, even though we haven't used pluses or minuses, but you know, that'll give us a nice idea of where to rank it though. Next we have the Monk. And yes, we've been talking about monks a lot lately because the last multi-class tier video we did was Monk. And as I already mentioned, I gave Monk Paladin a D, and someone said that was overrating it, and they might be right. I feel though like more Paladin with just a bit of Monk is definitely even worse than a bunch of Monk with a bit of Paladin. And that's because I'm probably wanting to wear armor if I'm taking a lot of Paladin levels. Monk is going to make that impossible, even worse than Druid in this case. Smites, it's been pointed out to me, do not work with unarmed attacks, so your flurry of blows cannot trigger smites. My bad. I hadn't read that closely enough. And in my games, we've actually been allowing that, so that's something we're going to have to correct, I guess. Fortunately, it hasn't been a big deal. It was only played once, and even with smiting on unarmed strikes, it was pretty underwhelming. So, you know, there is that as well. Like I said, no armor. You're also incredibly mad. Monk, you need dexterity and wisdom of at least 13 plus each. Paladin, you need strength and charisma to multiclass in or out of at 13 plus each. So 4 13s is a lot at character creation. And let's be honest, you're probably not that concerned about pumping up a lot of those other stats. Like, you've got enough problems with just strength and charisma. And by the way, none of those were constitution either. Let's bear that in mind. So in the end, I'm giving Paladin Monk an E. And it's worse than Druid. It's just terrible. Next we have the Ranger. And I wanted to like the Ranger more than I do in this case, but it's not great either. It's better than, you know, it's better than Monk and Druid, but again, you're getting Wisdom as a casting stat on only a half caster. Again, you need 4 13s because you're needing dexterity and Wisdom. The fact that it's only a half caster is offering us a lot less than other alternatives. You can get a fighting style. You know, if you want to say Gloomstalker, you could potentially get an extra attack in the first round. Hunter could give you an extra attack if you attack a second target within 5 feet. There are, you know, some of the other Ranger subclasses offer you good bonus action abilities. And of course, there's things like Hunter's Mark. But like I already said, you've got one of the most popular Paladin subclasses in the game, which does have Hunter's Mark on its spell list already. So I just really feel like in the end, Ranger just offers us a lot less than, say, Fighter did, which was a much better fit. So Ranger is going to get a D. It's still not, like I said, it's better than some, but it's really not great. Next, we have the Rogue. Obviously, Rogue is going to give us expertise. It's going to give us more skills. Expertise in athletics can make a great grappler. It can also be good if you took something like, say, the Shieldmaster feat and you want to knock people down a lot. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that feat, but, you know, it becomes a lot better when you have expertise in athletics, that's for sure. You could also go Arcane Trickster, which gives you some of the benefits we talked about with the Eldritch Knight, you know, potentially a shield spell or something like that, or, you know, whatever. I think Assassin for advantage on your attacks, and that can be good, leading to more crits. Auto crits, of course, if you manage to surprise somebody. But I will point out that's not necessarily easy to do on a Paladin, so there is that. Also, if you really wanted auto crits, I should have mentioned this under Fighter, but you could do something like cast a hold person, then action surge, and then attack, and then just auto crit smite people that way. And it's probably a much easier combination to pull off if you just go Fighter. But, you know, there is some good stuff there from Rogue. Again, though, you're needing dexterity, so you're probably going to make a dexterity build. You're probably just going to have your 13 strength or whatever you need, right, just to multiclass in or out. Not awful. I think Swashbuckler has some potential as well. I mentioned Assassin. But Swashbuckler, you get to add your charisma bonus to your initiative. So, you know, because you're going to have a good charisma, probably, there's something there to be said. So I feel like there are some rogue subclasses that are decent. But in the end, I'm giving it a C, and I was kind of leaning towards a low C, honestly. So I'm more like a C-. So, you know, Rogue's not awful, but again, there's much better. And speaking of much better, you know what we've come to. We've come to Sorcerer. Oh, Sorcerer. Paladin Sorcerer, and of course, Sorcerer Paladin, is one of the strongest multi-classes in the game. I've done an entire video talking about this before, and I'm sure a lot of other people have covered this. Charisma spell casting, the full caster, meta magic. This is very, very strong. And especially because of many of the strong spells we've been talking about, things like shield or absorb elements, etc., are all available on the Sorcerer spell list. The one downside of Sorcerer historically has been very, very limited number of spells known, but Tasha's has kind of remedied even that with our two newest subclasses. Of course, you could take something like a Divine Soul Sorcerer, now giving you access to the Paladin spell list, the Cleric spell list, and the Sorcerer spell list. Although, once again, you have to worry about spells known in that case, but, you know, it allows you to grab some of the best from each of these spell lists. There's also, well, first of all, let's talk about meta magic. Usually I think Quicken spell on a Sorcerer is okay, right? But you're limited to one leveled spell and then a cantrip if you want to cast two spells in the same round. And sure, casting, you know, maybe a Fireball, for example, and then throwing out a Fire Blast or a Fire Bolt or whatever it's called on top of that, you know, that's okay. But on a melee character, where you could quicken cast a spell and then still make your full complement of attacks, suddenly that's much better. Much like the fighter with action surge, you could quicken cast a hold person on somebody and then attack with advantage. And if you hit, those are auto crits. That's not too bad. What if you went, like we said, with the Divine Soul Sorcerer? You could quicken cast a Spirit Guardians. And now instead of that taking your action, it's using a bonus action, and now you're attacking on top of that. You can do things like just attack, and then quicken cast a Booming Blade or a Green Flame Blade. You can even smite on top of that Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, plus your regular attacks. You could cast, say, like the haste spell, right? And usually if you cast haste, that takes your action. You then get another action with which you could make one attack, or you can do some other stuff with it as well. But why not just quicken cast haste and then take your full complement of attacks plus that extra attack that haste gives you as a separate action on top of that? It's just much, much stronger, right? And quicken casting is so good on a martial character where you can just suddenly like just start breaking action economy, you know? And it is an amazing mix. Some other good choices are like Heightened Spell. You might not have been able to concentrate on charisma as heavily as you really want, because maybe you're going strength more, right? So giving somebody disadvantage on that saving throw can be really, really big, especially because, like I said, you might not have max charisma. Things like Subtle Spell could be pretty nice, you know? Eliminating chance of counter spells because there's no obvious spell casting. You can even get around things like not needing Warcaster as much, right? Another advantage of Sorcerer that I rarely hear people talk about, but it's one that I always mention, it's especially good if you're doing a lot of like deep dungeon runs where spell casting and running out of spell slots in general because of smites and stuff starts to become an issue. You know, if you're only having a couple encounters and then a short rest, a couple more encounters and then a long rest, you're probably not going to run out of spells that much, even if you're smiting like all the time, right? On the other hand, if you're in a dungeon and you go 12 encounters in a row with no resting or maybe one short rest in the middle somewhere, suddenly it becomes an issue. But one thing that sorcerers can do is they have the ability to convert spell slots into sorcery points and sorcery points into spell slots. And this gives you a lot more flexibility, that maybe you can drop a bunch of smites and use a bunch of low-level spells, and then you're like, you know what? I'm going to convert a couple of these spell slots that I can't use, because let's not forget, if you have, let's say, 6 levels of Paladin, that's 3 levels of full caster on top of your Sorcerer levels, which could give you spell slots, well, will give you spell slots that you do not have spells for. Now, you could upcast spells at those levels, or you could just use those spell slots and convert them into sorcery points. And then just replenish a bunch of your lower level spell slots and just keep smiting. And that can be really nice. Obviously, you know, going with more charisma is always good too, improving your auras and stuff. Nothing wrong with any of that. Overall, Sorcerer is just an excellent mix. And it's one that's kind of flexible as well, because sure, you could take 6 levels of Paladin, or 7 if you wanted to, like, the level 7 ability from Paladin. You could also take 11 if you just wanted more smites, and maybe you wanted to improve Divine Smite, but then you still wanted to add meta magics, and, you know, 11 levels of Paladin, 9 levels of Sorcerer would still potentially give you 5th level Sorcerer spells that you could be casting. You know, nothing wrong with that. It also, your 11 levels of Paladin counts as 5 levels of caster, which means you'd have 7th level spell slots as well. So, you know, that's also pretty good. But like I said, you can also take less Sorcerer levels, or less Paladin levels, sorry. The only real downside, I think, is that it pretty much requires at least 3 levels of Sorcerer, because that's when you get meta magics. So, I think you're a little more, like, locked into some of the builds where I really kind of like 6+ levels of Paladin, and I like 6 or 3+ levels of Sorcerer. And that's really like 9 levels before we've really started to come into our own. And in a campaign that only goes to, like, say, 9th or 10th level, it means that you're really not getting the full effects of this build until the end of the campaign. So in a campaign where we're going to be ending earlier, this isn't necessarily as strong as it would have been if we'd gotten, like, say, 12 levels or 15 levels or 20 levels, and we're really able to, like, grow into our full potential. Still, though, you know, it's pretty solid, and it's probably not going to be a surprise that I'm giving this an S tier ranking. Next, we have the Warlock, and this is also an amazing, amazing multi-class. In fact, it's so good that I'm going to have a discussion after this as to which one's better between Warlock or Paladin, because it can go either way. So obviously, charisma casting as well. You can get invocations. You can get things like short rest spell slots from Warlock, which nobody else is really giving you, right? And so the exact opposite of what we mentioned with Sorcerer. Maybe you don't have a lot of deep dungeon runs. Maybe you're in a campaign where you get in a fight, you short rest, you get in a couple more fights, you short rest, you get in another fight, you long rest, and that's it for the day. And you're just constantly being able to recharge all your spell slots, or at least all your Warlock spell slots, on short rest, and just able to keep dropping more smites. That is awesome. If you want to be a smite machine, that is great. You can also get things like Eldritch Smite, allowing you to stack, at the cost of 2 spell slots, one of your Divine Smites and an Eldritch Smite on the same attack. So let's say you get a critical hit, you decide, I'm going to drop my highest level Paladin Smite, spell slot, on a Smite, with my highest level Warlock spell slot on a Smite, and just double up all those dice of damage. Now, The Eldritch Smite isn't quite as good as the Divine Smite, really, because you can only use it once per turn, not, once per hit. But it does knock targets prone, so that could be good if you, say, open with an Eldritch Smite, knock a target prone, and then follow it up with attacks at advantage. There is some potential there. Of course, no discussion of Warlock would ever be complete without at least mentioning the Hexblade. Oh, the Hexblade. This allows you to attack with your charisma, meaning that you can really just have enough strength to wear whatever armor you wanted, and then just focus all your ability score increases into charisma, and charisma becomes your strength, essentially, and your charisma. It means that your aura is going to be excellent, even better than a regular paladin's, because you're going to max it out. It means that, for the level of 1 Warlock level, you can just be attacking using charisma. That's a very small investment. Hexblade gives you shield spell, for example, as well. It can give you Hexblade's Curse, which, you put Hexblade's Curse on a target. Now you get to add your proficiency bonus to all your damage for all those hits. And you also crit on a 19 or 20, which of course just gives you even better smiting options. But of course, you can take more levels of Warlock, which just gives you better spell slot progression, more invocations. Like I said, 5 levels of Warlock, you can take Eldritch Smite. You don't have to worry about, like we mentioned with a Fighter or a Ranger, or some of these other classes doubling up on extra attack. Because Warlocks, by default, do not get extra attack. They can get it, though, through an invocation. But you don't need to take that invocation because you've got extra attack from Paladins. So you just ignore it and take a different invocation. Warlock also gives you something nice that a lot of Paladins really struggle with. And that is a decent ranged attack. You can take Eldritch Blast. If you've got enough Warlock levels for a bunch of invocations, you can even take Agonizing Blast. Sure, you're probably not going to be using it all that often. You're going to be up front in melee most of the time. But this just gives you a decent ranged option for when you need it. And that's something that Paladins usually kind of suck at. Now, not as bad if you have a bunch of spellcasting options from, like, say, Sorcerer or whatever else. But just saying, compared to a straight Paladin, it's very, very nice. And, at the end of the day, probably no surprise again, but this also gets an S. So let's cover Wizard really quickly, and then we'll talk about kind of the differences between Warlock Sorcerer versus Warlock Paladin, and where I think each shines more than the other. So, Wizard. We're going to make this quick. It's an E. Almost everything you get from Wizard, you could have gotten from Sorcerer, and it would have just been straight up better. Now, Sorcerer doesn't have Find Familiar on the spell list, so if you really wanted a Familiar, you could do that. But honestly, you've got Find Steed. I mean, come on. Basically, though, it's just worse in every way than Sorcerer, or Warlock for that matter. Again, we'll have the War Wizard caveat. I can't believe how good War Wizards are at multiclassing. I've never played one before, and so it was one that I kind of overlooked. I always thought it was pretty good, right? But then when you start looking at it, you're like, man, 2-level War Wizard dip is great. It's going to move that up to a D, maybe even a C. It's so nice that just every round you could be using your reaction to boost a saving throw or your armor class. The reason I say a D, though, probably, is because, as a Paladin, you've already got pretty good saving throws. You've got your Aura of Protection. So being able to boost your saving throw isn't as nice as it is on a lot of other classes. It's still good, right? You're still going to miss even with Aura of Protection. But there's less benefit than a lot of other classes. And, boosting your armor class is nice again, but you could have just used a shield spell. Granted, War Wizard could have given you that, but so could Sorcerer, and so could Hexblade Warlock. So, and Eldritch Knight, like we already mentioned earlier. So, Wizard. Anyways, let's do our final grades, and then we will, talk about where actually, let's do this first. We'll talk about Sorcerer, Warlock, or Sorcerer versus Warlock combined with Paladin, right? Both have a lot of nice things to offer, like I said. Warlock, the main advantages here is, like I already mentioned, short rest spell slot recovery is amazing. And, being able to grab an Eldritch Smite potentially on top is really good too. I feel like if you're in a campaign where you're constantly getting short rests and you really want to just be a smiting machine, I think Warlock is the superior choice. And Hexblade in particular, allowing you to really focus on your charisma, is awesome. Now, I should point out that if you want to use a two-handed weapon, Hexblade isn't going to help you unless you have at least 3 levels of Warlock, because the Hexblade ability only works on one-handed weapons until you have Pact of the Blade, which you don't get till 3rd level. Now, that's probably not a big issue, but, you know, there may be, if you want to go great weapons, for example, there may be a couple levels there where you're like, oh, crap, I still have to use my strength, or I have to use a one-hander suddenly. You know, be aware of that. Both of them are probably going to want you to maybe take Warcaster if you want to go sword and board. You know, that's not a bad thing, though. Warcaster is a great feat. I will point out, in another bonus for Warlocks, though, is you can just take the, I think it's called Elder's Concentration or something, but basically it's like Warcaster, but it's an invocation. It gives you advantage on all your concentration saving throws. It doesn't give you the other advantages that Warcaster does, so you're not going to be able to Booming Blade a guy as an opportunity attack, for example, which is great, but I find that that's a lot more circumstantial. It doesn't come up as often in my games as concentration saves, which come up all the time. On the other hand, Sorcerer gives you meta magic, and Quicken Spell is so good. I cannot stress enough how important being able to quicken cast full action spells is on this type of character. It is amazing. The other problem is packed slots are their own separate thing. So you're going to have your Paladin spell slots, you're going to have your Warlock spell slots, and that can be good, right? But it also means they're not combining together. Whereas with Sorcerer, all your spell slots are combining, you're getting your overall casting level, and that's going to allow your spell slots to progress even more, right? So that's actually a bonus for the Sorcerer as well. The other thing is, just in general, I find that the Sorcerer spell list is just better than the Warlocks. There are some exceptions. Armor of Agathis is an amazing spell, especially on a character like this. But you could get it from going, let's say, Oath of Conquest has it on their spell list. So, you know, there are other ways you can get that as a Paladin already. It does require one specific subclass, and maybe you didn't want to play Oath of Conquest. You know, fair enough. But, you know, just saying there are ways to do it like that. In the end, I think as much as I'm a Warlock player, and Warlock's my favorite class in the game, and as much as I love Paladin Warlock, I think I have to give a very, very slight edge to Sorcerer. And the main reason is, I personally like smiting. It's fun, right? I like dropping big smites, especially if I got a crit. I don't always smite when I got a crit, but I lean that way probably 90% of the time, right? Unless I think the target's going to die regardless, then, you know, whatever, right? If you've got 4 hit points, I'm obviously not going to drop a spell slot on them. But as much as I love that, I also love the idea of being able to cast spells in combat with my Sorcerer by just quicken casting them and then still attacking as a Paladin. I love the idea of being able to quicken cast a Booming Blade or a Green Flame Blade as well. Like, all this is like really, really good stuff. And I just feel like Sorcerer has just, I don't know, just that little extra bit. Being able to convert your spell slots into sorcery points and sorcery points into spell slots is another thing that just gives you a little more flexibility, right? And so while I kind of rank them basically as a tie, I would, for my personal play style, I kind of prefer having more spell casting slightly, especially at higher levels. When like high level spells are awesome, you know, they just are. We all know it. You know, that's just the way it is, right? And so as I get to higher and higher levels, I kind of start to value the ability to quicken cast spells more than I value being able to smite and get my spell slots on a short rest back, right? And as you have more and more spell slots in general, you tend to just not run out of spell slots regardless. So I find that the Warlock, well, levels great as well. And while I think it's actually stronger at lower levels. One of the advantages of the Warlock, especially if you want to just use a one-handed weapon, for example, is that one level of Hexblade is already giving you huge benefits, right? Compared to, like we said, with Sorcerer, where you're kind of needing 3 levels of Sorcerer, right? I mean, you can take 2 levels of Paladin, then go Hexblade Warlock for 1 level, just as an example. And already, you've now basically never need to worry about strength again. You've got enough to wear your armor, you're good. You just concentrate on charisma the rest of the way. You finish out your Paladin levels, you just grab a bunch of Warlock levels. Maybe you want to grab more Warlock or, right away too, whatever. You're just going to use Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade instead of extra attack to cover that difference until you get your Paladin levels up. Either way, they're both very strong. But I think Sorcerer is slightly better, in my opinion, and for my personal playstyle. But like I said, if you're getting lots of short rests, or if you just really, you're like, yeah, I like casting spells, and I still plan on casting some, but I really just want Armor of Agathis, and I want a bunch of smites. Warlock is great too, and, hard to go wrong. Of course, you could just go Warlock, Sorcerer, and Hexblade. Just saying. That is also awesome. But, we're trying to keep this to just 2 classes, because if we start adding 3 and 4 and 5s, and, there's an infinite combination, and you can't even rank them all at that point. But anyway, just would be really, really negligent to not at least mention the possibility. Anyways, so our final grades. In the S tier, we have Sorcerer narrowly edging out the Warlock, at least in my opinion. In the A tier, we have Bard, followed by Fighter. In the B tier, we have the Barbarian. In the C tier, we have the Cleric, the Rogue, and that's it. In the D tier, we have probably War Wizard, followed by Artificer, and then a Ranger. Although the order specifically there, I think, is pretty debatable. All of them, I feel, are fairly weak. And then finally, in the E tier, we have the Druid, followed by the Monk. So that is it for Paladin. Our next couple of videos are going to be more Paladin videos, of course. We're going to take a look at a couple of subclasses we haven't looked at so far. There's probably not a lot, because I've done a lot of Paladin videos in the past. So, but I'll try to see, there's got to be at least 1 or 2 subclasses I haven't covered. Maybe there aren't, who knows. But if there are, we'll do videos about them. And then, of course, we'll move on from Paladin and, what's next? Ranger? I think Ranger. And Ranger should be pretty good too. Ranger has some really nice mixes. Maybe not quite as iconic as Paladin, but there are some very, very strong multi-class options for Ranger. So that'll be fun, hopefully. But anyways, thank you for watching. That's everything. Feel free to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave me your comments in the comment section. Most importantly, I look forward to reading them all. I know people were getting tired of Monk, and frankly, I am too. But hopefully, now we're into the era of the Paladin for a little bit here. And, Paladins are awesome, like I said. They're one of my favorite classes in the game. I think, in general, I don't see a lot of people ever complain about Paladins. They've been very well received. They've got some cool, unique mechanics. Smites are just kind of fun. Like, who doesn't like doing lots of damage? Even if it's not necessarily the most efficient thing you could have done with that spell slot. Sometimes just casting a spell would have been better. But, the best status condition the monster could have is the dead condition. And, Smites help with that. So, what can I say? They're just a great class, and they're honestly just fun to play. But anyways, that's everything. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.